Welcome to the Feehery Theory Podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means excellent for business. I'm joined by my colleagues John Easton and Adam Belmar. John is the former Chief of Staff to Senator Kelly Ayotte and Senator Gordon Smith, and is known in Washington as a most excellent campaign and legislative strategist. Right? Adam is a recovering journalist and television producer. He worked for George W. Bush and is known for his prowess as a visual storyteller.
Also true.
Yes, that's good. And I'm your host, John Feehery. We are broadcasting live from EFB Worldwide headquarters, a block away from the iconic and historic Eastern Market on Capitol Hill. And we are delighted that you have tuned in today. Theory 1, last stand for the establishment. Republicans have about 18 days left in this congressional session. If you don't include getaway days, that means they have only a limited time to get tax reform done. Failure is not an option. And yet, there are already signs that some more moderate members in the Senate that they might not be on board to pass tax cuts, especially if they lead to the deficit. Here is my theory. If Republicans don't pass tax reform, it will be a disaster for mainstream Republicans. The president will blame Mitch McConnell. The Republican base will blame all incumbents. Steve Bannon will have a field day. And we could even get more people like Roy Moore winning primaries. John Easton, do you agree that tax reform is critical for the Republican establishment?
I think it is more than critical. It could be the future of the Republican Party in the next election. But I also think it's critical to just governing, period. And I believe that if these guys and gals can't get this done, but with the balance of the year, I think that it could be trouble. And I think what it calls upon each member to think about whether they really want to put their own demands, personal demands, of which many of these members have many personal demands, in front of an overall policy. So with Rand Paul's of the world and some in the Freedom Caucus, I think with the healthcare reform bill, that is ultimately what killed it was it just couldn't satisfy all the personal demands. And yeah, I think it really depends on them to say, okay, I got my 80% of what I wanted, and I'm going to go ahead and get on the boat.
So the theory that led to this is what happened with Obamacare repeal. Adam, the Republicans failed to pass Obamacare repeal and replace. That was the thing that they were supposed to do. And we get Roy Moore beating Luther Strange in the Alabama primary a couple days later. And Luther Strange had nothing to go to the voters about. The Republicans had all promised that they were going to repeal Obamacare and replace it, and they never got there. And if Republicans have also promised to reform the tax code to create more economic growth, if they don't really deliver on this, I think they're in big trouble. And you have guys like Bob Corker who have come out and said, I don't want to vote for this if it leads to the deficit. Well, we don't know if it's going to lead to the deficit or not. I mean, this is all, what do you think about this, Adam?
Well, Bob Corker said a lot this week.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I want to challenge on this theory is, why exactly is failure not an option? It seems to me like failure is most definitely an option, because we've had a lot of failure, and while the ramifications of failure might be easier to see, I don't believe that it's not an option. I think that they are becoming rather inured to the criticism and probably well heeled to the losing. I'm tired of losing. I agree with you that this policy is needed.
So you're not tired of winning?
No, there's not been any winning. Less winning, more other things. I really no longer subscribe to this theory that this has to get done this year. It would be great to get it done. It's been teed up. It's ready to go. It might have happened if they had started with it first. But I'm not convinced that in the time that the Senate or that Congress itself has left this year, that we're going to see any actual enactment of tax reform.
Well, I think it goes to momentum, and momentum in legislating means a lot. So if you have momentum, let's say the Finance Committee, the Senate Finance Committee starts this process, the Ways and Means Committee does it, it works its way. The biggest problem with legislation hanging out there too long is of course, as many have watched, it dies on the vine. It gets uglier and uglier as time goes by. So that's why I believe it is really critical. And then you get into the election year of 2018.
Well, that's the real problem.
That's
isn't
the
it?
problem.
But I don't think it's such a problem or such a deadline that it's going to absolutely force action. I mean, let's be honest. There are a lot of elements of this that have caught people's attention. There is a continued concerted effort, and we saw it just here at the end of this week. The president continues to talk about it. The speaker is out there. Lots of folks are making the case for why tax reform is going to help the manufacturing base, how tax reform is going to help create jobs in America and make us more competitive on the world stage. But all of the rates and all of the things that are really detail-oriented, still not known. And if you take a look also at the rhetoric, it's now changed. In large part, people are talking about cuts, not reform.
Yeah, I would say
think that's telling.
I would say that there is, to John's point, there's a lot of momentum. The House passed the budget. The Senate Budget Committee passed a budget, and they're going to bring it to the floor next week.
They'll pass the budget.
And they'll pass the budget, and then both bodies are going to reconcile. Without a budget, you don't get the tax reform. So it's a good sign that they're getting the budget done. So that's very helpful. My worry is that people are going to flake out, and if they flake out, and this is the other problem, my other worry, is it'll pass the House, but it won't pass the Senate because 3 or 4 members, you got Rand Paul on the far right, I don't know what the hell Rand Paul's doing, and then you got Bob Corker on the left. We don't know how John McCain's going to vote. We don't know how Susan Collins is going to vote. We don't know how I think Lisa Murkowski is going to be fine. But this is the problem with having a very tight Senate, John.
Mm-hmm. It is, and it's also the problem of reconciliation, which works for one party very, very well. In this case, the Republican Party, just like it worked for the Democrats with Obamacare. But the problem is with this razor-thin margin, you have almost no margin for error. And you know, the president has been working on Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, of Senator Donnelly of Indiana, and these are all, and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, all very gettable Democrats, but there's such an anti-Trump, lockdown in terms of where they can go, where they can't go. Right now, they're not being pushed to move. I do think, though, there's an interesting this morning, and this could be a factor. The new jobs report came out. 33,000 jobs lost in September. I think it could be one of those things that just kind of adds to the imperative of tax reform.
I think that's right. There is
Well, it was not altogether unexpected. And we know why. We've seen the hurricanes. We have an appreciation for what has happened to the economy in places. And so people are, especially economists, are going to be able to say, we have a strong, not amazing, but a strong job growth month over month at around 170,000 jobs. We definitely regressed in this latest statement by the Department of Labor, but there's also going to be a bit of a rebound. I agree with you. It plays into the narrative. I just don't know that it, as itself, is indicative of pushing people over the edge as a need for all of this reform.
John, going to my original theory about the idea of the Trump administration going to be attacking Senate Republicans if they don't pass tax reform. Nick Ayers, who was the vice president's chief of staff, went to a meeting of big donors and basically said, if these bozos can't get this thing done, we're gonna go after them, and you should go after them. I've never seen anything like that. Well, actually, that's not true. I saw something like that in 1992. Ed Rollins told congressional House Republicans to run against President Bush because Bush was going to lose, and
Right.
they decided to just run against. So this is the kind of internal fighting that can lead to a disaster for the Republicans.
Yeah, it's so poisonous, and it really serves to seed distrust of one another, the administration of particularly the House of Representatives. I think that's where you're getting at, John, and that's where it's aimed right now. At least the Vice President's Chief of Staff was right at the House of Representatives leadership. But of course, we saw this with McConnell and President Trump. as well. But the thing is, in having lived sort of in the Senate culture in two very competitive Senate seats, one thing you realize right away is that, yes, there's Washington pressure, particularly with senators, but it's nothing compared to pressure of the electorate of your home state.
Yeah.
Look at Lisa Murkowski, look at Susan Collins, and many, many, many others. They are going to answer to their state first and foremost. And a lot of times, if they're getting pressure from the president and they go the other way, it only emboldens them.
Yeah,
It
right.
only increases their popularity. So the president, the White House, has real limits on this. I remember with Senator Gordon Smith of Oregon, when he was working with President George W. Bush, your former boss, they were so wise in that White House politically, because they would say, do what you need to do, Gordon.
Right.
You obviously, and we didn't need his permission for anything, but there was an acknowledgement that
There was
you were
a
going to
very
do.
open and coordinated level of communication and understanding
Absolutely.
in that shop.
And that's political reality. And they also knew that Gordon Smith answered to the people of Oregon
Right.
first, and they weren't naive about that.
Adam, thinking about this some more, the fact of the matter is that Republicans are having a hard time now raising money because
You're damn right they're having trouble.
they're having
money.
trouble raising money because they're not getting anything done.
Well, and you know what? I could just say this for myself. I'm constantly barraged, as folks who are involved in the political system are, by fundraising requests. I've got somebody who I really care about, Ed Gillespie, who's running for the governor's seat in Virginia. And I'm supporting Ed. I'm supporting Ed financially. I'm trying to support Ed in all kinds of ways. But when I get emails from the NRCC and other groups, including the RNC, telling me about how much money the Democrats are raising and why it's so I'm like, do something.
Right.
Absolutely show me something. And I think people have become a bit downtrodden. And they're just not going to continue to pay for the fallacy of a majority that will bring us some return on agenda. And that is why Republicans are having trouble. And there's only one way to fix that.
Right, and I think that that's exactly right. And I think that for Republicans, they have to prove they can govern. And if they don't, you have these Steve Bannon type of things who are thinking about running primary challenges. That was a big thing in 2010 and 2012. Mitch McConnell was able to kind of fight him off in 2014 and 2016, but it might be coming back. The interesting thing is who defines what a conservative is.
There's a big fight about that. Word is so loaded.
I think it's
these
so
days.
loaded, and it's not clear to me. For example, I think Chris McDaniel is going to be running a primary campaign against Roger Wicker in Mississippi. I mean, that guy is worse than Roy Moore. John, looking through this, I think members are running a little bit scared.
I think they're running scared. I mean, having a primary fight, there's nothing quite like it, and there's few things worse politically than having to, get into a mud bath within your own family, within your own party. But I think that the thing that members have to do is first and foremost, they got to be themselves, and they have to act on their convictions, and they got to go home and sell it. And I think because the voters are so smart. I mean, they're so intuitive about their members of Congress.
Right.
They really are. And if they start to sniff a phony member who just he's got the finger in the wind in terms of tough positions and tough votes, they can sniff that out a mile away.
Can I just make one observation? I wholeheartedly agree, and I know that what you're talking about, and you've taught me a great deal about this from your own experience. This is so very true. But I've been paying close attention for quite some time to Senator Jerry Moran in Kansas. And we've had occasion to work with Moran. This is a genuine community leader. He is all over the state of Kansas. He's constantly talking about the votes that he's taking, the things that he's working on. I'm not holding him out as an anomaly. There are a lot of members who are doing this, but this is genuine communication that's listening in both directions and an honest, not cynical attempt to try and bring people into what's going on here in Washington on their behalf. That's the kind of thing that moves me.
Well, you're right. I think about the old saw, 9/10 of any job is just showing up.
Yeah.
And I think of someone like a Roy Blunt or a Rob Portman, and Barrasso, Senator Barrasso. What those guys all do is they all show up, and they are always there, and they're always working it, and they're always showing their voters why it's important to get them reelected, because they're actually representing their interests back in Washington, D.C. And it's a little bit less ideological, and that's what I'm trying to get at with this whole Bannon thing. Bannon is trying to define the Republican Party as a conservative party that's nationalist and a little bit kind of off the beaten path. I don't know where he's trying to go with it, but it's kind of. But the number one thing is they're anti-establishment, and they're kind of rebels without a cause. And I think that, you know, if you're a legislator and you're in the charge of governing the nation, you can't be a rebel without a cause. You actually have to do stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference between members who survive and members who, especially a primary challenge, and members who usually get beat, because the members who get beat are the ones who aren't doing their job.
Did you guys hear, and did any of you hear, what Steve Bannon had to say after Las Vegas? As you all know, there's been an increasing attention, and people are looking not just at what can we do on guns, but is there something that we can all agree on? And now everyone's been educated in the course of the last few days about what this bump stock is that the shooter used to take a semi-automatic weapon and turn it into something that approximated the fire of a automatic weapon. And so there's a lot of agreement suddenly, at least on this one issue in Washington.
Even the NRA.
Well, exactly right. But where's Bannon? He's talking about capitulation on this front could be the end of it all. Well, you know what? This kind of hyperbole in the face of all of these things, you know, the end of what, Steve? The end of your fantasy reworking of the establishment into a hyper-conservative government that lasts for eons? Yeah, it might well be. But I think people are suddenly starting to realize that we need to find common cause. And where we can find it, we need to act on it. Even if there are major legislative priorities that this president is pushing that there isn't great agreement on, like tax reform, we got to figure out where we can get together, and then we've got to be able to govern.
And that's ultimately the final theory here, which is if Republicans want to protect themselves against the Steve Bannons of the world, they got to get tax reform done, and then they got to prove they can govern. We all agreed?
Yep, all agreed.
Theory 2, sexy Rexy. I've been a big fan of Rex Tillerson. He is the adult in the room. He has a commanding presence and the bravado of a true Texan. But time is running short for our Secretary of State. He has run afoul of the president, and when it was revealed that he called the president a freaking moron, I use freaking for another word.
This is a family podcast.
This is a family podcast.
He sealed his fate. My theory is that sexy Rexy is out by the end of the year. Adam Belmar, you worked for President Bush. Can you imagine if a cabinet secretary called President Bush a freaking moron?
This is a tough question because at some point, I think we've all thought of those we work for in similar terms.
What?
So there's a sort of, okay, let's just keep it real for a second. Do I think that really happened? I think maybe it did.
Well, it would have been helpful if the Secretary of State had denied it categorically.
That's right.
I don't think he could.
He's
too honest.
And Heather Nauert was forced to take to the podium later in the day and let folks know that at least her boss had told her that he had not. No, I really couldn't imagine a lack of discipline and a lack of support for the President of the United States occurring in that administration. And I think you're right. The President has gone hard over in the other direction. Just yesterday, the two men spoke. The President says he has full confidence in Tillerson. But the reality is, and this is a broader topic that we've talked about here on the Feehery Theory many times, who can honestly speak for the President of the United States? Who, if not the Secretary of State? And yet the President has undermined his secretary again and again. And just this week, he said publicly that Rex was wasting his time talking to the North Koreans. We're in the face of a nuclear threat, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Bay of Pigs, or the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think that while there's a lack of credibility on the Hill for members of the cabinet who come up to talk and are undercut constantly by the president, when we are speaking through our Secretary of State, no one is going to trust a Secretary of State who's cut off at the knees by the president. And so I agree with your theory that I think regardless of his position that he didn't say he didn't think he was going to resign and he didn't need to be forced by the vice president not to, I think we'll be lucky to see Secretary Tillerson stick around just past the beginning of next year.
John Easton, I like the Secretary of State. I think he's a good guy, but it hasn't exactly been smooth sailing for him throughout his term here as Secretary of State.
No, let's call this what it is, Rexit.
Okay, that's fantastic. Okay. I'm on a tight shot. Damn it, I should have been one.
So it's Rexit, and he is going to go. It's Friday in Washington, D.C., and that means somebody could go. And it could be the fourth in line to the presidency, Rex Tillerson. I don't know. I'm with you, John. I kind of like Rex Tillerson.
Yeah, doesn't
style.
somebody get voted off the island every Friday?
Pretty much every Friday. You know, nothing quite like Scaramucci, but Rex is different. You want to get that?
Yeah, sorry about that. I hadn't thought about the telephone occurring during my live switching of the Feehery Theory. We'll try and cut this out. So let's pause for a second for station identification, and then pick it up, John.
So I think Rex Tillerson is probably gone soon. Maybe of his own, by his own design, by his own desire. I'm not sure, but the word is around circles, around inside circles, is this is broken beyond repair, and I think that's probably right. These two men have such different styles. This is a former CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world, a button-down guy, and probably a guy whose word is gold. And there's no undermining going on when you're at that level, but it seems to happen constantly. So I think that this is what TV shows are built around. This is like House of Cards and the intrigue. This is palace intrigue going on right now. The chief of staff was heading to Las Vegas with the president, and he had to get off that plane. I don't know if he was on the plane at the moment or not, but he had to pull off that trip and get Rex Tillerson and Secretary Mattis to the White House to try to, staunch the bleeding. That's how bad this was.
Well, think about that triumvirate, right? You have Mattis, and you have
Kelly,
Tillerson, and you have
right.
Kelly, and they had a kind of a blood oath that they would stick together and no one would leave because they needed to protect the country. And I'm glad that those guys are there. I think that the markets are glad that those guys are there. They assume that as long as those guys are there, that everything's going to be fine. That being said, Tillerson has been undercut throughout his time there. He's starting really with the Qataris and the Saudis. They had a different position on that. You had the different positioning on North Korea. You have
in Iran, and
Iran,
this is going on this very week, and
and what we're being told from inside folks is that the Boy Scout speech was a real problem for Secretary Tillerson, who used to head the Boy Scouts, and I think that's what I'm talking about with styles. Not only has he been undercut on North Korea and other world affairs, but I think he had a hard time stomaching that speech. It's just not Rex Tillerson's style.
Right. I would also say that Tillerson has not exactly had a smooth sailing at the State Department, which is really interesting because you would think that someone like Tillerson would be beloved by the press, but he's actually had really tough press relations throughout his tenure, and the people in the building are not that big fans of him either.
Well, he's not touchy-feely. He's not warm. There have been reports that folks have been told not to make eye contact with the secretary. He doesn't get out a lot within the building. And the other thing that we know...
I was always taught that you're supposed to make eye contact with everybody. That's so weird.
Isn't that etiquette?
Yeah, aren't you supposed to make eye contact? How...
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that the report is that it's sort of like...
Don't look at him? Don't look at me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, they've also had, clearly, because they want it to be this way, they haven't filled a lot of spaces and important roles over there. They're taking the hatchet to the Foreign Service. They dismissed a whole class of up-and-coming Foreign Service officers. There's a fundamental philosophical remake going on at the State Department in the background, and I think a lot of the press over there, as honest and good practitioners of journalism as they are, they've gone native. They're very close to the people who are full-time folks there after 8 years of Barack Obama's administration. There's obviously a lot of unhappy career service people at state.
Yeah, and they don't buy into the Trump nationalism thing. It's not clear to me that Tillerson does either.
Right.
So that I think that's so. Who do we think will take his place?
You know who it is.
Is it going to be Pompeo?
No. It's going to be the current U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, the former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley.
That's I think it's probably Mike Pompeo, and I say that just because his relationship with the CIA director is much stronger than Nikki Haley. I think Nikki Haley is a natural choice, but with President Trump, it's all about rapport and relationships.
Did you hear what R.C. Hammond said about Nikki Haley? Throwing her under the bus? The
No.
vice president is not happy with that.
No, and
This whole team needs to get its act together.
He retracted that this morning, and he's
Well,
getting
you know what?
briefed about
I
that
tend
too.
to think of things not obviously from a substantive perspective, but also optically. And I hear your point about Pompeo, former congressman from Kansas, now the director of Central Intelligence. But missing an opportunity to elevate a woman who, while she doesn't have all of the qualifications necessarily to be the Secretary of State, but then again, did Tillerson, you have a constellation around the president that is dominated by men, and we have very few female leaders in this country at the moment, certainly on the Republican side of the aisle. And I think the president, being the optics guy that he is, will probably consider that at least. Maybe
for sure.
ultimately.
Let's also consider one other factor here that's probably enormous inside the West Wing, and that is that since John Kelly went from Secretary of Homeland Security to be Chief of Staff, that job is still vacant. There is no Secretary of Homeland Security.
Yeah.
There's an acting secretary, so that job is vacant. And if Rex Tillerson goes, that is two major department heads, secretaries, vacant in that, in that
and Price,
administration.
right, HHS.
And Price is out at HHS. So I know one thing that General Kelly is thinking, which is I'm not sure how much more chaos we can handle.
I know, I know that that's what Kelly's thinking, and I think he's right to think that.
What does the Senate do, John? I mean, can they gear up to run confirmations
Sure.
against all of this that quickly?
They can. I mean,
Concurrently with all the other priorities that are there?
they
could do that.
they would have no choice.
Okay.
I mean, they would have to. This is just his number one priority is to get those positions filled. You can do tax reform at the same time.
They're different committees.
They really,
but
yeah.
it's still a big deal. All right, let's move on. Theory 3. I read the news today. Oh boy. Las Vegas happens and the conversation immediately turns to gun control. Puerto Rico happens and the conversation immediately turns to how President Trump hates Hispanics. The NFL starts and the conversation turns immediately to the national anthem. Here's my theory. We need to put politics in its proper perspective. We need more safe spaces for our kids. We need to be able to relax as a society. We need to stop politicizing everything. I'm going to throw this open to both of you with this question. Where is your safe space, your politics-free zone?
Well, my politics-free zone has typically always been sports, and I just don't know if it's there anymore. I think that entertainment in general has also been a place where I've gone, but I just don't think it's really there anymore. I do to your question about the kids. We need to have safe spaces for kids. I think part of what you're referring to is not everything they turn on, whether it's a TV or whether it's their device, is dominated by the most recent tragedy. And I think that has definitely been going on around our households, which is in itself tragic. But I do think that this is part of the rise of 24/7 news and cable news, and that everything has got to be reported at all times, and everything is breaking news. And everything is usually breaking news means bad news. So I think it's incumbent upon, if we're talking about kids, it's incumbent upon parents to, put a governor on that a little bit. And
We took time this week to actually, among the three of us, talk about how, if at all, and when we were going to talk to our own children about this.
That's true.
Yeah, I talked to my son about it, about the shooting in Las Vegas, and he didn't really want to engage and didn't really want to talk about it, which I think is fine. And we don't really have news on. We try to watch ESPN, although ESPN has become so political that my safe space is either MLB channel, where they typically don't talk about the news, or the Golf Channel, which I love. But the part of this is, everything is political. You turn on the Emmy Awards, and you got all these actors, immediately they have to go on to the politics. You have Jimmy Kimmel, and Jimmy Fallon, not so much, but obviously Stephen Colbert. I mean, you cannot escape politics. And, Michael Jordan used to say that, Republicans buy shoes too. But these days, politics is just smashed in your face. And I'm not going to blame Donald Trump for this, although I think he's part of the reason. But part of it is because the left is just can't help itself, and they're talking about politics all the time. And maybe it's not just a left-right thing, but Golf Channel is a very, very safe space for me.
A safe space for me, I don't know that there really is one, except in this regard for when I'm with my children. And I cherish those times, and we tend to not talk about these issues very much, and we're insulated talking about the things that make us laugh or what's going on at school. But I can tell you that I have made a concerted effort in 2017 to keep the television off. And I want to tell you why I do that and how it's helping me a bit. And we could start with sports. I love the Redskins. I know you don't. And, I still like you, but you're completely wrong on that. But the point is that when you watch a football game, especially with a team that you love, you're going to get really excited. Heart gets going, you're yelling, you're screaming. But I've turned off the television, and I'm starting to listen to radio. Radio is like the theater of the mind. You've heard that before. But in some ways, I'm taking the same approach to news and to politics. And I've described myself recently as a bit of a news vegan. And I'm trying not to consume processed news. And I'm going right back to listening to exactly what is said at every press conference, or reading the transcripts and making my own decisions about it, and removing myself from the vitriol and the visual. I'm a visual communicator. This is one of the things we do at EFB that makes a big difference for our clients. And yet taking a step back and removing that element from it lets you be a little bit more detached and less swayed by every last bit of breaking news or the repetition of violent images. And I think that to create a safe space, we have to try and reconfigure how we consume some of this stuff, and even recommend to our loved ones. My mom is doing this a little bit less now, not watching the news. And I think we have to protect ourselves almost emotionally and mentally, and that might be a challenge, but that's how I'm trying to do it.
So my son and your daughter are learning in school today about primary and secondary sources, and you're talking about going right to the primary sources, which I think
want the raw feed, baby.
The raw feed, which I think is smart. Now, not a lot of people can do that because they don't know how to get to the primary sources, and they don't have the time. But to Adam, to your point about the processed food of our news world, where you're getting a lot of saccharin, you're getting a lot of chemicals. You're not getting a lot of truth. You're getting what we call
not a lot of protein there.
Not a lot of protein, a lot of fluff, and not a lot of. So if you're talking about campaign, the stories that have to do with the political process, they're not talking about the nuts and bolts of the legislative process. They're talking about the horse race: who's up, who's down, who's winning, who's losing, and not talking about how this impacts all Americans. I think that is a real problem. John Easton.
Well, I think that is right, and if you think about the number of news organizations that are calling objective balls and strikes, so to speak, is really narrowing. And part of it, I think, is money. I think you've got the MSNBCs of the world, you have the Fox News of the world, and they are catering, and Huffington Post, and they are catering to a segmented audience, and because more and more people, I don't know, you put the chicken before the egg. I don't know who comes first, but you have news that's generated for a particular audience. You have an audience that really just wants that kind of news. I know for me, I get the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal both delivered to my doorstep every day. One is center left, one is center right. I mean, that's the way I look at it, and I'll take it back to another level. Because I've done a lot of campaigns, and I've done communications in a lot of campaigns, and the one thing I always relied upon was the the press, the media being arbiters of the race that I was involved in. It could be the local television station. It could be the local radio station.
Yeah, but that's...
And especially the local daily newspaper.
That's exactly right.
So in my case, often it was the Oregonian, or up in New Hampshire, could have been the Union Leader. But it is so important that forget about the editorial page. That doesn't matter. It's the daily beat writers who would cover, and they've got a lot coming at them from both campaigns, but also the national organizations coming at them, trying to influence them. And they've got to keep their heads straight and be objective. When that dies, I think that it's going to be a real serious problem in our body politic, and I'm really, really worried about it. And so, to your point, Adam, about radio and the broadcasters and the news people, I don't know if they realize how important their jobs really are to our democracy.
Adam, we talk about balls and strikes, and we're going to get to real balls and strikes when we talk about the Washington Nationals playing in their playoff
Is it the
game.
playoffs yet?
It's the playoffs have started, Adam.
Okay.
I know that you're not a big baseball fan. Maybe you should become one. But Adam, you have we're not for the podcast. You can't see this, but if you're watching the video, the live feed on Facebook Live and on YouTube, that you can get through the Feehery Theory channel or through EFB Advocacy web pages. Adam, you've got this hat on. You want to talk to us about the hat that looks like a Major League Baseball hat?
Well, it absolutely does, and I will tell you that my father, Warren Belmar, long collected baseball caps from different events and places that he went, and I picked that up along with other things. And I've been collecting hats, and I've taken to wearing them on the Feehery Theory podcast, whether you can see them or not. And so
You're hiding that great head of hair of yours,
It's true that I'm follically challenged, and often I've been told that wearing headphones while being bald and fat is no way to go through life. So, but all honesty, this is a unique hat. It's a hat that was designed by me for the Romney campaign, of which I was a part in 2012, and the director of Advance for Romney, an amazing guy named Will Ritter, who has an agency down in Richmond called Pool House, said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do something that Mitt is going to like, and that's going to help bond folks in the campaign together. And so let me take it off for a second and show it. It says Romney Road Crew. And on the side, it's signed by Mitt Romney, and it has the MLB logo, but we took Mitt Romney on the stump.
And that's Mitt Romney right there?
That is Mitt Romney. And it was just given out to folks on the campaign, and John Easton has led campaigns. I've worked on some statewide and presidential campaigns. I've never led one. But one thing I know from folks like John Easton and from Will Ritter and others who do lead is they take great pride in making sure that there are points of cohesion for everybody, that they have great reason to feel like they've fought a good fight, that they're doing good work, and that there's morale. And this is one way that you do that.
That's right. That's neat.
That's neat. Now, great
Romney Road Crew.
Great cohesion. Sad thing about Romney is he didn't win, but that's fine.
It's not like we didn't try.
He might win when he runs for the Senate. But we have a big game tonight, John Easton. The Washington Nationals are playing the Chicago Cubs. I am from Chicago. I'm from the south side of Chicago. I am an avid White Sox fan, and if there's one team that I hate more than the Redskins, it's the Chicago Cubs. And I have a lot of friends who are Cubs fans. I have some family members who are Cubs fans. My brother is a Sox fan, as I am, and he was on the. He really kind of was happy for the Cubs that they won the World Series. I, on the other hand, was rooting for the Cleveland Indians because I hated the Cubs so much. And from my perspective, it was really not consistent with the beliefs of my father, my dearly departed father, who was also a White Sox fan and hated the Cubs more than anyone, and threatened to write us all out of the will if we became and rooted for the Cubs at any time in our life. That being said, this is a very important game tonight, John Easton. It's the first game. The Nationals have to get off to a good start.
Well, and I'll add, you're not only a huge Cubs fan, but you are a huge Nats fan. So
I'm a huge White Sox fan. I hate the Cubs.
I'm sorry.
Let me
You want to go back? We can edit this.
I'm gonna go back. You're not just a huge White Sox fan and Cubs hater,
right,
but you're a great Nats fan, and you are going tonight, and I'm envious. I am pretty fired up about this, and what's interesting is I feel like there's a lot of confidence in this town right now, particularly those who follow and report on the Nats every day. I think this is going to be a really good series, both two really good teams, and I think the Nationals are led by tonight Steven Strasburg. He is in a zone. I think people are really high on him right now. I think the pitching staff is geared up. I think they know what's ahead of them. I think they've learned a lot from their past series where they didn't quite make it out. They played the Dodgers great last year. That could have gone either way, really. But I think they're primed. I would tilt it in their favor.
So Adam, we were talking about what to talk about a local establishment, and I'm going to do a little kind of a audible right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk a little bit about my favorite place to have a drink before the game.
How do you take all of the places that you like to have a drink and bring one to become the favorite?
Before the game, my newest favorite place to have a drink. Before the game. And I don't know if you've ever been. There's going to be a lot of new development on the river. The wharf is going to have a bunch of different stuff down there. It's very exciting. But right now, there's a place on the water called Salt Line. Great outdoor restaurant, great food. The bartenders could be a little bit better, to be honest with you. They're not that great. Some are good, but most of them are kind of just mediocre.
Yeah, they're not friendly enough.
You got to be friendly. That being said, the location is great. And Gavin, Gavin Coleman, whose dad owns the Dubliner, which is my all-time favorite bar outside of Butch McGuire's, all-time favorite bar, is part owner of the Salt Line and been developing it.
Is it right down there on the water?
It's right down on the water. I would recommend that you go to the Salt Line before the game, if you can. But you've been there, right, John?
Been there, and I love it. And I would say that I think in time that will just be a real staple because, as John said, it is just right there on the water, and it is fun, and it's just a really lively atmosphere, despite the bartenders trying to bring it down a notch. We bring it up a notch.
Yeah.
But I'm going to throw one other at you, and I know you're a big fan, is the bullpen.
Yeah.
And I say that because, not because it's a great bar, because it's not really a bar. It's a beer garden. It's really what it is.
It really is. That's exactly what it is.
It's this organic thing that is it's surrounded by containers.
What are they, shipping containers?
Yeah, they're shipping containers and pallets, and it's basically an outdoor warehouse. And you've got a band up there playing, and you have plenty of folks serving beer all over the place. So you never really have to stand in line long.
Well, it's great. I mean, the bartenders there are very nice.
Very nice.
And it's owned by Bo Blair, who was a Villanova grad, went to school with my wife. So nice.
And
nice
I
guy.
think because of the development you were talking about, I think its days are numbered.
I know.
But for now, it's great, especially for these playoffs. It's going to be great.
So, Adam, I know that you're not a huge baseball fan, that you're more of a football fan, Redskins fan. But what do you like to do when you're down in the Navy Yard? Is it a place that you like to go? Have you been down there with the kids at all?
I've been down to the Navy Yard with you guys, and I have to admit, having moved to Eastern Market and being kind of a creature of my neighborhood, I lived 15 years in Falls Church, and I got to know and patronize businesses there and things related to school and so forth. I haven't gotten down to the Navy Yard, and I've been talking to you about it with the kids, and the thing is that it's a walk. It's a good walk, and it's one I need to do. So I need to take your advice, and I would beckon anyone from Washington, D.C. to realize that over here in Southwest and in Southeast, there's some amazing areas that are just growing. The community is great. You see women and families walking around with babies and dogs, and D.C. has come to life, and I've lived here my entire life.
They do have women here in D.C., which is kind of nice, right?
Well, the point is, I'm saying it's a safe space. We talk about safe spaces.
Safe spaces, yeah.
There are people out there just freely moving and having a good time, and it's wonderful to see. And it's worth taking those longer walks to get down there.
I would say that baseball is a safe space for me, and I think hopefully if we can keep the politics out of baseball because it is a truly American sport.
It really is. I would say it's a Major League ballpark is essentially a rated G to PG, whereas an NFL stadium, based on my experiences,
rated R, baby.
That's pretty much rated R.
Right. I agree.
Well, for people who are enjoying the Feehery Theory podcast, which of course you can find on iTunes and on the Feehery Theory webpage, EFB, and across Facebook, you will see the video. We have taken advice from members of our tight group of people who love this podcast, and we have put the EFB logo in the television behind us. We have now stepped up our visual game, both the hat, the background, things are moving forward. And I just want to say thank you to the thousands of people who follow us every week.
Thank you all for joining us today for the Feehery Theory Podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means excellent for business.
We didn't quite hit that right. I don't know.
EFB means
Excellent for business.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, we did it right.